I mean, honestly, like, hats off to this man right here. Like, he did a lot of the heavy lifting for me and Mel and Octavia before we actually got on board to the project. So,
What if the most dangerous thing in a Hollywood studio isn't a leaked script or a box office bomb, but a secret that bleeds? For years, Michael B. Jordan has been the industry's golden boy, the charismatic face of billion-dollar franchises. Yet behind the closed doors of Warner Brothers, a different story was being written. The production of the supernatural epic Sinners was more than another career move. It was a calculated heist of creative power. While the trailers teased gothic horror and ancestral shadows, the real terror for the executives was the fine print in Jordan's contract. Why did the world's most bankable star risk his reputation to expose a system designed to keep creators in the dark? Is it possible that the monsters on screen are less predatory than the men who funded them? To understand the truth, we must look at the bloodline. Michael B. Jordan exposes what producers tried to hide in Sinners. The golden child of the new guard. For decades, Hollywood relied on a specific archetype of the black leading man, the stoic moral compass defined by Sidney Poitier, or the high-octane charisma of Will Smith. Jordan represents a mutation of this lineage. He is the first superstar of the social media age to weaponize his own likability as a tool for corporate restructuring. From his early days on The Wire, where he portrayed the heartbreaking vulnerability of Wallace, to the physical dominance displayed in the Creed series, Jordan cultivated a brand that felt both untouchable and deeply relatable. His influence is not merely measured in ticket sales, but in the systemic changes he forced into his contracts. When he announced the adoption of inclusion riders through his company, Outlier Society, he effectively ended the era where a star could claim powerlessness over the diversity of a film crew. This was the birth of the golden child of the new guard. He became the rare talent who could walk into a boardroom at Warner Brothers or Disney and demand not just a salary, but a seat at the table where the intellectual property is just rented. Culturally, Jordan serves as a bridge between the traditional Hollywood system and the burgeoning creator economy. He understands that in 2026, a movie star must be an architect of their own mythos. By the time he began developing Sinners, his positioning was unique. He was no longer just an actor for hire. He was a premium brand with a global footprint that studios could not afford to lose to a streaming competitor. This leverage allowed him to pitch a story that many executives found uncomfortable. He wasn't just asking to play a hero, he was asking to dismantle the very tropes that made him famous. His trajectory from a young boy in Newark to a mogul in Los Angeles is the blueprint for a new generation of black creators who refuse to be sidelined by the old guard's risk assessment models, the Coogler-Jordan connection. The transition from being a rising star to becoming an industry titan is often a slow, grueling process of attrition. However, for Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler, this evolution was a strategic partnership that redefined the boundaries of black cinema. Their collaboration is not just a success story, it is a case study in how creative loyalty can be leveraged to dismantle the traditional studio hierarchy. This bond began in 2013 with the raw, heart-wrenching intensity of Fruitvale Station. At the time, Coogler was a first-time director and Jordan was a television actor looking for a breakthrough. The film cost less than $1 million to produce, yet it won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance, and signaled to Hollywood that a new, uncompromising voice had arrived. This initial success created a foundation of trust that allowed them to take bigger risks with each subsequent project. When they moved into the mainstream with Creed, they weren't just reviving a dormant franchise. They were repositioning a classic American underdog story through the lens of black legacy and fatherhood. Jordan's performance as Adonis Creed proved he could carry a massive blockbuster, but more importantly, it proved that Coogler could handle large-scale IP without losing his soul. By the time they reached Black Panther, the duo had become an unstoppable force. The film's $1.3 billion global haul gave them the ultimate bargaining chip, the proof that high-budget, culturally specific stories could outperform generic global entertainment. Public perception during this peak was one of total confidence. Audiences connected with them because they represented an authentic brotherhood that seemed immune to the typical ego clashes of Hollywood. Yet, it was this very success that made the industry nervous. The more power they amassed, the more they moved away from being safe bets for the studios. They stopped looking for permission and started setting the terms. This shift is what led directly to the development of Sinners. They had spent a decade building a track record that made them bulletproof, and they intended to use that protection to tell a story that Hollywood had spent years trying to hide. The Coogler-Jordan connection became a shorthand for excellence and cultural relevance. They created a rhythm where Coogler would write characters demanding extreme emotional honesty, and Jordan would perform them with a vulnerability that made even the most supernatural elements feel grounded. In Sinners, this synergy reached its zenith as Jordan took on the challenge of playing identical twins, Smoke and Stack. This wasn't a gimmick. It was a calculated artistic choice supported by Coogler's intricate timeline of the twins' backstory in the Jim Crow South. Their ability to secure a $100 million budget for an original R-rated horror film is a feat that very few creator duos in history have ever achieved. It was the culmination of a decade-long plan to move from the margins of the industry to the very center of its power structure. The genesis of Sinners. The tension surrounding Sinners did not begin with the cameras rolling in the Louisiana heat. It started in a sterile boardroom where the script was first presented as a ghost. When Ryan Coogler began shopping the project in early 2024, he didn't lead with the vampires. He described a period piece set in the 1930s Mississippi Delta, a soulful exploration of Black brotherhood and the blues. It was only after the major studios were already leaning in that the supernatural teeth of the story were revealed. This deliberate pacing of information was the first sign that Jordan and Coogler were playing a much deeper game than Hollywood was used to. The bidding war that followed was unlike anything the industry had seen for an original concept. Universal, Netflix, and Sony all circled the project, but the eventual deal with Warner Brothers sent shockwaves through the executive suites. Coogler and Jordan didn't just ask for a $90 million production budget, they demanded terms that challenged the very foundation of the studio system. Most notably, they negotiated a clause where the ownership of the film would revert entirely to them after 25 years. In an era where content libraries and perpetual intellectual property are the lifeblood of stock prices, this was seen as a radical act of defiance. Industry insiders whispered that the deal could destabilize the studio system by emboldening other creators to demand their own sunset clauses. But then the internal pushback began. As the script's deeper themes of Jim Crow violence and historical trauma became clearer, the marketing departments grew uneasy. There was a quiet, persistent pressure to lean into the action and cool factors of the vampire genre while downplaying the film's raw commentary on white supremacy. Producers worried that an R-rated horror film with such a heavy political heartbeat would alienate the global audiences that turned Black Panther into a phenomenon. This was the moment everything changed. The Golden Child was no longer just making a movie, he was fighting for the right to keep its soul intact. That tension bled into the production itself. Jordan took on the grueling task of playing twin brothers, Elijah Smoke and Elias Stack Moore. To ground the supernatural elements, he and Coogler insisted on shooting on Ultra Panavision 70mm, a format traditionally reserved for massive historical epics. They were treating a monster movie with the reverence of Lawrence of Arabia. This insistence on technical perfection and narrative weight created a rift with those who wanted a faster, cheaper, and safer version of the story. Jordan's decision to play two versions of the Black experience, one pragmatic and guarded, the other charming but deceptive, mirrored the dual battle he was fighting with the studio. He was one man acting against himself, just as he was one star acting against the machine that made him. Industry dynamics. The ownership war. The ownership war surrounding Sinners is perhaps the most significant labor dispute in modern cinema, played out not on a picket line but within the fine print of a contract. To understand the gravity of this moment, one must look at the standard Hollywood model. For over a century, studios have operated on a work-for-hire basis. A creator brings an idea, the studio funds it, and in exchange, the studio owns that idea in perpetuity. This system allowed entities like Warner Brothers and Disney to build massive libraries worth billions, while the original architects often saw only a fraction of that long-term value. When Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler entered negotiations for Sinners, they systematically dismantled this hierarchy. They demanded three non-negotiable pillars: first dollar gross, final cut privilege, and most controversially, the reversion of all rights after 25 years. This last clause sent a shockwave through the industry. In an age where streaming services rely on back catalogs to maintain their valuation, The idea that a blockbuster could simply expire from a studio's library and return to the filmmaker was viewed as an existential threat. One anonymous executive famously described the deal as a dangerous precedent that could signal the end of the studio system as we know it. The pushback from the old guard was not just about money. It was about the loss of control over Black intellectual property. Historically, Black creatives have been excluded from the back-end profits and the long-term stewardship of their cultural contributions. By insisting on ownership, Jordan and Coogler weren't just making a movie, they were reclaiming narrative sovereignty. They forced the studio to accept that their presence was more valuable than the studio's tradition of total ownership. This shift in industry dynamics has already begun to recalibrate expectations for other A-list auteurs, proving that in 2026, the most valuable asset in Hollywood isn't the camera or the screen, but the signature on the deed.
The double role psychological play.
The psychological weight of Sinners rests entirely on Michael B. Jordan's ability to split his persona into two distinct, clashing frequencies. Playing the Smokestack twins, Elijah Smoke and Elias Stack Moore, was not merely a technical challenge involving green screens and body doubles. It was a calculated excavation of the double consciousness described by Black scholars, where one must navigate two different worlds to survive. Jordan didn't just change his clothes, he changed his biology for the camera. To differentiate the brothers, Jordan and director Ryan Coogler used sensory anchors. Smoke, the older and more pragmatic twin, is a man of heavy silence and strategic violence. Jordan wore shoes a size too big for Smoke to force a grounded, slower gait that signaled a man who carries the weight of his community's safety. In contrast, for Stack, the gregarious charmer and risk-taker, Jordan wore shoes a half size too small. This discomfort created a physical restlessness, a man who literally could not sit still because he was always running from the trauma of his past. The industry often views dual roles as a gimmick, but here, it served as a metaphor for the internal conflict of the Black elite. Smoke represents the soul that refuses to compromise, while Stack represents the desire to integrate and find liberation through economic charm, even if it means inviting the devil into the room. Jordan worked with dialect coach Beth McGuire to ensure that even their breathing patterns were different. Smoke's voice is a low, guarded rumble, while Stack's cadence is melodic and inviting. This psychological play was Jordan's way of exposing the masking that society requires. By performing against himself, Jordan mirrored his own real-world struggle with the studio. He was simultaneously the bankable star the producers loved, Stack, and the uncompromising artist they feared, Smoke. The ultimate face-off between the brothers as their juke joint burns is not just a climax for a horror movie. It is an internal interrogation of what must be sacrificed to achieve true independence in a rigged system. Media narratives versus reality. The disconnect between how Sinners was sold to the public and what it actually delivered is a masterclass in narrative bait and switch. In the months leading up to its 2025 release, the media narrative was carefully curated to fit a comfortable high-octane mold. Trailers leaned heavily into the siege elements, showcasing Michael B. Jordan in peak physical form, wielding makeshift weapons against a supernatural threat. The industry trades framed the film as a direct competitor to the Blade reboot, focusing on the cool factor of Black vampire hunters in the 1930s. This was the version of the story that Hollywood felt safe selling, a genre-bending action flick that utilized a bankable star's athletic prowess. However, the reality of the film was far more meditative and unsettling. Once audiences were in their seats, they discovered that the vampires were not just monsters, but a sharp metaphor for the predatory nature of cultural appropriation and the music industry. The film spends a significant amount of its runtime exploring Black enterprise through the twins' juke joint, treating the business of the blues with the same intensity as the horror sequences. While the marketing suggested a splatter-friendly thrill ride, Coogler instead delivered a Southern Gothic history lesson that prioritized the survival and dignity of the Black community in Mississippi over cheap jump scares. This gap between perception and reality sparked a heated debate among critics and fans. Some felt betrayed by the Trojan horse approach, while others praised the film for treating its audience like adults who could handle a messier beast with complex social commentary. The media's insistence on comparing Sinners to Jordan Peele's Get Out also created a false expectation of a singular, easily digestible metaphor. In reality, Sinners was a far more eclectic film, blending Afrofuturism, religious skepticism, and a critique of Black capitalism. By the time the fallout settled, it was clear that Jordan and Coogler had used the studio's own marketing machine to smuggle a radical, uncompromising vision into the mainstream, proving that the greatest trick the Golden Child ever pulled was making Hollywood fund his own rebellion. Racial dynamics and the horror pivot. The pivot into horror for Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler was not a simple choice of genre, but a calculated move into the most potent space for social critique. Historically, horror has been a minefield for Black characters, often relegated to the first to die or the mystical advisor whose only purpose is to save the white protagonist. Sinners disrupts this lineage by placing Black survival and the specific anxieties of the Jim Crow South at the absolute center of the frame. By setting the story in 1930s Mississippi, the film argues that for Black Americans of that era, the arrival of supernatural vampires was merely another layer of a nightmare they were already living. This horror pivot allows the filmmakers to use the monsters as a physical manifestation of systemic predation. In Sinners, the act of draining blood is a heavy-handed but effective metaphor for the way labor, music, and life itself were extracted from Black communities to fuel a broader economy that gave nothing back. The studio originally pushed for a more standard action horror approach, fearing that leaning too hard into the racial dynamics would label the film as political and hurt its broad appeal. However, Jordan and Coogler understood that the horror genre is most effective when it is most specific. They traded the safety of a generic monster movie for a story where the real terror is the inescapable nature of one's own history. The film also challenges the Black horror trend set by predecessors like Get Out or Us. While those films often focused on the modern middle class and the sunken place of suburban integration, Sinners returns to the soil. It looks at the rural, the religious, and the ancestral. The pivot here is about reclaiming the monster. In many scenes, the twins, Smoke and Stack, have to decide if becoming monsters themselves is the only way to protect their people from the human monsters at their door. This moral ambiguity is what Hollywood producers tried to hide, preferring a clear hero versus villain narrative. By insisting on this complexity, Jordan and Coogler forced the industry to accept a version of Black horror that is as intellectually demanding as it is visually terrifying. The leaks and the pushback. The release of Sinners in April 2025 was preceded by a volatile cycle of leaks and corporate anxiety that threatened to overshadow the film itself. While the public saw a polished marketing campaign, behind the scenes, a battle was raging over the film's R rating and its uncompromising tone. Early test screenings in late 2024 reportedly left some executives screaming because the film was far more violent and politically charged than the studio's action-adventure branding suggested. Rumors began to circulate on platforms like Reddit and X that Warner Brothers was attempting to cut down some of the more graphic sequences involving the twin brothers, Smoke and Stack, to secure a more commercially viable PG-13 rating. However, Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler held their ground, backed by the final cut privilege they had fought for in their original contract. This creative standoff became public when several descriptions of the film's blood-soaked opening and its depiction of racial violence leaked online. Instead of hurting the film, these leaks galvanized the audience. Fans of the duo began a grassroots movement to save the vision, seeing the corporate pushback as yet another example of a studio trying to sanitize a Black auteur's work. The controversy reached a fever pitch when it was confirmed that Sinners would indeed be R-rated, making it Coogler's first film to receive that rating since his 2013 debut, Fruitvale Station. Once the film premiered at AMC Lincoln Square, the narrative shifted from controversy to acclaim. Legendary filmmaker Spike Lee famously described it as the greatest experience of watching a film in years, effectively silencing the skeptics. Despite the internal fears that the film was too dark or too niche, it grossed over $63 million in its opening weekend, the biggest debut for an original film in over half a decade. The fallout from the leaks revealed a fundamental truth. The public was more ready for Michael B. Jordan's raw, unfiltered vision than the producers who were supposedly protecting the bottom line. By the time Sinners ended its theatrical run with over $370 million worldwide, the leaks were no longer seen as a threat, but as the spark that ignited a cultural phenomenon, the franchise of the self. The success of Sinners reveals a fundamental shift in the 2026 entertainment landscape. For decades, the industry operated on the belief that IP is king, that audiences only show up for established brands brands like Marvel or Star Wars. Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler proved that in the modern era, the creator is the IP. By reclaiming the rights to the film after 25 years, they didn't just win a contract negotiation, they established a new model for the franchise of the self. This story reveals that fame is no longer just about visibility, it is about leverage. Jordan used his status as a global leading man to force a $90 million bet on an original Black story, proving that the risk Hollywood associates with Black-led original content is a manufactured myth. Culturally, Sinners acted as a catalyst for a broader discussion on historical erasure. By using the vampire as a metaphor for the extraction of Black culture, specifically the blues, the film forced audiences to confront how the entertainment industry has historically sucked the life out of Black innovators while giving them no ownership of the results. This is the universal insight of the Sinners phenomenon. The most terrifying monsters aren't the ones with fangs, but the systems that demand you trade your soul for a seat at the table. The film's record-breaking 16 Oscar nominations and Jordan's Best Actor win weren't just trophies. They were an institutional surrender to a new guard that refuses to be rented by studios. The bloodline continues. The conclusion of Sinners does not offer the audience the cheap catharsis of a clean resolution. Instead, it leaves us in the quiet, stifling heat of a 1930s Mississippi dawn. As the character of Smoke faces his inevitable end, the film defies traditional horror tropes. He doesn't find a hell of fire or a heaven of clouds. Instead, he finds a sun-drenched, eternal juke joint, a sinner's paradise, where the music never stops and the trauma of the Delta is finally washed away. This choice by Coogler is a radical reclamation of the afterlife, suggesting that for those who have lived under the thumb of earthly monsters, peace is found not in perfection, but in community. Let's pivot to the 1992 timeline shown in the film's coda. We see an elderly Sammy, the witness to the twins' sacrifice, sitting on a porch. He is offered the gift of the bloodline, the chance to live forever. His refusal is the most powerful statement in the entire 150-minute runtime. By choosing to grow old and die, Sammy validates the beauty of a finite Black life. He proves that the greatest act of rebellion against a system that treats people as disposable property is to own one's own mortality. What Michael B. Jordan exposed in Sinners was not just a plot twist about vampires. He exposed the fear that resides at the heart of the global entertainment industry. The fear that a Black creator can be so talented, so disciplined, and so strategically sound that they no longer need the system to survive. The ownership war we've analyzed throughout this documentary was won not by force, but by the sheer quality of the vision. When we look back at this moment in 2026, we won't just see a successful movie. We will see the moment the golden child became the king. Jordan's transition from an actor seeking roles to a mogul defining eras is the ultimate success story of the new guard. He and Coogler have created a blueprint for every artist who has ever been told that their stories are too specific or too risky for a global stage. They proved that the more specific the pain, the more universal the power. The credits for Sinners roll to the sound of a lone Delta blues guitar, a reminder of the blood that was shed to keep the music playing. We are left with a final, lingering question. In a world that constantly asks you to trade your soul for a seat at the table, what are you willing to lose to keep your name? Michael B. Jordan didn't just play a hero on screen. He became one in the boardrooms. Perhaps the greatest sin in Hollywood isn't being a monster, it's being free. Do you think Michael B. Jordan's ownership deal will actually change Hollywood, or will the studios find a way to lock the gates again? Drop your comments below. If you found this insightful, subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of fame and the shifting power structures of the Black elite. Thanks for watching.